Welcome to another edition of Westphalia's Faith Podcast. My name is Austin Fox. I'm joined once again this week on the segment by my co-host, Bryce Thelen. Before we dive into tonight's segment, we'd like to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Jesse Thelen and JT5 Media. Jesse does tremendous work with graphics and artwork. If you or someone you know needs a graphic made, feel free to reach out to him at 989-640-4513. You can also find him on Twitter at JT5Media. With all that being said, we're excited to announce that we're joined by a very special guest tonight on the podcast, an outstanding Westphalia citizen who really exemplifies what the Catholic faith is all about. Pewamo-Westphalia varsity boys head basketball coach Dominic Schneider. Dominic, thanks a lot for being with us here tonight on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with both of you guys.
So when Bryce and I first started talking about potentially having a guest on the podcast and who we thought some good candidates might be, obviously we wanted someone who really exemplifies their faith and someone who takes it very seriously. Dominic, you managed to edge out Father Eric in that regard. But Father Eric was runner-up. He was a close second, so that's got to count for something. I'm not quite sure how the votes were tallied on that one. We might need a recount, but either way, Bryce, it's inspiring, isn't it, when you see someone who's so dedicated to their faith and someone who really makes it a main priority in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially when Austin and I were having conversations, one thing that really stuck out with Dominic here was it's someone who really takes his faith and lives it. You know, a lot of people do it through, everybody can do it at church on the weekends. You can give that hour, but we were really looking for someone who goes up above and beyond that, someone who takes it into their home, takes it into their family life, and as a husband and father to two daughters, it's just a great example of someone who really, is truly selfless. And, to live life effectively, you really need to have that faith to ground you and give you strength when you're running low.
You can talk to a lot of people who are Catholic, and obviously they'll admit that it's a big part of their life, but oftentimes when you ask them why it's a big part, I think that's something that's not as easy to answer for whatever reason. Some people it is easy, but others have to think about it quite a bit. So, Dominic, in that regard, I'd love to hear your take on why your Catholic faith has been and still is a huge part of your life.
Yeah. Touching back on that Father Eric comment, I joked to Austin when he texted me to be on the podcast here. I said, "Are you sure you have the right number?" But all kidding aside here, back to why my faith's important to me. It's just because it's the calm to all the craziness around me and around others at all times. There's so many things in today's world that makes you get caught up in what you think is important. But when you take a step back, your faith truly is what holds everything together. When things are going bad, we seem to pray harder, but when things are going well, it's easy to just put that faith on the back burner. I'm guilty of this as well as a lot of us here, I'm sure, but my faith is important to me because our faith helps us realize a potential of closeness to God that's just so beautiful.
When did your faith become important to you? Obviously it is now, and I'm sure growing up, I know your parents, I'm sure, really instilled it in you, as did a lot of parents around the Westphalia area, but is it something that's always been as big a part of your life as it is now?
To be honest, no. I was your typical cradle Catholic. I was raised up in the faith ever since birth. I attended Mass every weekend since I was really young. I just went through the motions as a young kid. To be honest, just went to the weekend Masses and just checked that box off on a week-to-week basis. When it became really important to me was right around probably my junior or senior year of high school. They had Bible studies at the high school on Thursdays. So it was just something extra I did. And I know at the time, it was my girlfriend, Bethany, now my wife, we did a Friday adorations together, and it really just took off from there. So when I graduated my first year out of high school, we went to a Veritas, which is, I believe it's 25 and younger, Austin, Bryce? Is that the sound right? 30
and younger.
Yeah, so I went to Veritas, and that really just lit a fire under me. That was a great weekend. Ever since then, that took a whole new meaning to me. From there, back in December of 2013, I joined a men's group that's actually still going on today. It was started by Father Matthias, and this is something that really holds me accountable, and it keeps you grounded, and something that really means a lot to me.
It's funny that you mentioned Veritas because I actually had the chance to go on a Westphalia retreat a few weeks ago as well, and it was the first one I'd ever gone on. It was an amazing experience. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect going in. It was all Westphalia people, about 25 of them, which made it a really cool experience. I'd highly recommend to any Catholics in the area, if you do have a chance, to take advantage of stuff like this. You certainly won't regret it afterward, and only good things come from it. You'll without a doubt grow in your faith, and again, I'd highly recommend all of them. Dominic, this next question is one that's really interesting to me. Who has influenced you significantly in your faith life? Has there been really any people who have been role models for you? You talk to people around the area, and parents are usually a really common answer, but is there anybody else who has really jumped out at you and helped you strengthen your faith over the past 20, 25 years or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. Two people jump to mind right away when you say that. First off, Father Matthias, I already name-dropped him before a little bit. He really helped me keep the desire to grow closer to God. He's one that pushed our men's group to start. Just to seeing his passion and desire to know God, but also spread his word, was always inspiring to me. He always hit home with his homilies on the weekend, and you just see God working through him. His healing masses were something that really struck me too. Those were just beautiful, and they still are to this day. The way you could just feel God so present in those healing masses and whatnot. So yeah, he'd be my first influence. And the second one that comes to mind is my grandma Spitzley. She made a point when I was a young kid to include us in going to rosaries and going to weekday masses and doing some of the extra stuff. And at that time as a kid, I would usually have the shrug of the shoulders or like, come on type attitude. Like, come on, Grandma, I don't really want to be doing this. But looking back, she did such a great job showing us how we need to really push ourselves each day to grow in our faith. I'll be the first to admit, I'm far from perfect when it comes to that day-to-day prayer and growing in the faith. I struggle with the desolation of it as much as anyone. But I think the biggest thing is to not hold back and use that as an excuse and always know that each and every one of us is worthy of growing in our faith, no matter where you're at in our life.
I think it's awesome that you mentioned your grandparents as well, your grandma, because I was in the exact same boat, Bryce. I would assume you were as well. All four of my grandparents were a huge influence for me in that regard and really were role models for me and helped strengthen my faith. Bryce, are you in a similar boat in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, both the people Austin talked about, Father Matthias and his grandma too, it's just someone you see who's seen a lot in life, and it's from two different walks of life. You have a religious vocation. You see someone who God has just lit such a fire under, and it shows persistence. Then he talks about his grandma just egging him on, pray the rosary with me. Just the little things, the little nudges. It's not, forcefully asking. It's just, we're called to evangelize, and it's just those little nudges that, you can ask somebody 20 times in a kind way and not pressure them necessarily, but it's just that nudge that sometime they're going to get to a point when it just clicks. And I think that's what's just absolutely vital for people is that, hey, I care. When you're looking at low, let me help you. There's something, and grandparents especially, come from my own life. It's something, they've been through it all. I mean, they have lived on this earth, 60, 70, 80, 90. I've had a grandpa who just passed away earlier this month at 106. And just to hear the stories, and his classic saying was, how do you live to 106? Obviously, everybody wants to know what's your formula, and he'd say daily mass and a glass of whiskey. And it's just one of those things where it's just that humility to reach out for something greater than yourself, and so selflessly do so, that I think is beautiful and sticks with people.
Words of wisdom right there. I think it's also about being persistent, the way that they stay on you and they don't give up. Your parents do that, your grandparents do that. Country singer Jason Aldean uses a phrase in one of his songs that I absolutely love. He refers to his life and how he had an all-American mom and dad, and I think that is absolutely spot on. Probably 90% of the people from Westphalia, if not higher, I think would agree with that sentiment. We're so fortunate in that regard in this area because we do have parents who made sure the Catholic faith was ingrained in us since birth. And like Bryce and Dominic were both saying, they stay on you if you ever do start to fall away a little bit or slip in your faith. They pray for you. Your grandparents pray for you. And again, we're so fortunate to have influences like that in our lives because a lot of people around not only the U.S., but the world don't have that. So I think we're incredibly blessed to have the kind of people in Westphalia that we do have. Dominic, are there any prayers or any saints or anything along those lines that you and your family really like to turn to in times of comfort or in times of struggle or anything like that?
Yeah, Ever since I was a kid, I've always had a fascination with St. Dominic Savio. I know it's pretty obvious, it's being that's my name and whatnot, but I remember in elementary school we had our All Saints Day project and whatnot, and I really dove into St. Dominic Savio at that time. And he had one of my favorite quotes. I still have it wrote down on my desk at work. It goes, "I'm not capable of doing big things, but I want to do everything, even the smallest of things, for the greater glory of God." I'll say it again. I'm not capable of doing big things, but I want to do everything, even the smallest of things, for the greater glory of God. I think that's just so beautiful, especially when you take into account the St. Dominic Savio passed away when he was 14 years old, really young. So, I mean, these words are coming from a very young teenager's mouth, and he knew what it was all about. And so ever since I was a kid, he has always been my go-to saint when I want to pray to a saint and whatnot.
How about you, Bryce? Any prayers that you really turn to in times of comfort, or any saints whose intercession you try to seek?
Yeah, I think St. Michael has had a huge influence on my life, and just you see, I think what sticks out to me is the typical guy thing is just ultimately masculinity you see in St. Michael, and he was a true warrior for Christ. And I think to me one of my favorite Bible quotes is about picking up your cross and following Christ, and that ultimately St. Michael, they kind of go hand in hand there, where it's truly fighting the good fight, and it is carrying your cross, and it is defending God each and every day of your life. So I would definitely say St. Michael, and then obviously St. Joseph too, just his ultimate humility.
I discovered a prayer a few years ago that I really like, and it's one that I try to say several times a week now. It's a prayer to the archangel St. Raphael, and in the prayer you're asking him for his intercession about a certain topic. And one of the very first lines of the prayer talks about how you're putting your entire confidence and trust in him and in God, that they will come through and basically answer your prayer. But I think it's important to remember that a lot of people pray, and if their prayer isn't answered immediately, they oftentimes complain about that, God didn't necessarily hear me. And that's not necessarily the case. And that's why I find this prayer so comforting, is because you're putting trust in God's plan and his timeline. Things aren't necessarily going to happen automatically. It oftentimes takes time. Bryce, I'm glad that you mentioned St. Joseph as well, because he was one that I was going to talk about too. This past Lent, Westphalia did the consecration to St. Joseph, and they gave out books. The parish community gave out a book on him, and they had meetings once a week and whatnot. And it was a really cool experience, because it took a deep dive into his life and the kind of person that he was. I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily know a ton about him, and I didn't either, but it shed light on just how great of a role model he is, not only for people, but for guys specifically. It talked about how he's the ideal role model when it comes to being a father and raising a son, and because of the way he raised Jesus and what he taught him during his time here on earth. It also talked about how he's a great role model for husbands because of the way he treated Mary with respect and dignity. And really, those two went through a lot together. And even when he had doubts and uncertainties at first, when things weren't looking so good, he stuck with it. He stood by Mary all along, and obviously things worked out well. So I couldn't agree more that St. Joseph is an outstanding saint to turn to. Dominic, this next question is a really interesting one, because obviously in our lives nowadays, there's so much to balance, whether it's life, work, things outside of work, relationships, family. How do you find the time to balance all of that, but at the same time making sure that your Catholic faith remains the main priority in your life?
Yeah, I think when I got married, that was another step in my faith, where it's like, all right, now I have to be the man of the house type thing. And then when having your first kid and whatnot, it's like, okay, obviously the babies are too young to really realize what you are doing around the house, but it makes you take another step back and say, how am I living my life day to day to show them the level of respect they need, but also if you're not living your life in faith, what are you really showing them and whatnot? So it really makes you take a step back and say, all right, I got to step up myself. But in regards to balancing it, there's so many obstacles that are thrown at us in life. Just so easy nowadays to make an excuse about time. So every single morning, my morning prayer, I pray for more time in a day. And I know that sounds silly, but maybe that means some hour that you are with your kid, that hour is just going to be a longer hour, and the minutes might just go a little slower. So you're that much more present with them and whatnot. I try to have a rhythm for things, about my scheduled time with stuff, with prayer. I know life's not perfect, and you're going to have kids waking up earlier or later in the day and whatnot, but if you can try to just put 10 minutes a day in the morning, 20 minutes, half hour, whatever fits your schedule, just to be alone with God, it's just going to start your day out on the right foot. Just knowing that day to day, your life isn't going to be perfect, but if you just put that best foot forward and just try your hardest to have everything prioritized with your faith and your family and everything else behind that, you'll be off on the right foot.
I think it's awesome that you talked about your family and the importance of sharing your faith with them, because that's actually what my next question was kind of going to be about. Father Peter Lawrence this past Sunday actually talked about that during his homily, and he had one quote in particular during it that I thought was incredible. I'm going to read it here. He said that it's tempting to think you're not doing anything extraordinary, but that's okay. God comes to you during the simple things in life. Simply being a faithful spouse, a faithful mother or father to influence those around you and help them on their journey to heaven is essential, and that's absolutely spot on. And Dominic, I was going to ask, obviously sharing the faith with your wife and your kids is essential, like Catholics believe and like Father Peter said, to help them get to heaven. And I'm sure it's a two-way street. It's vice versa. They help you as well. So just why is it so important? I know you touched on it a little bit already, but why is it so important to make sure that they all stay strong in their faith and that, you make sure you stay persistent in it, not only when your kids are young, but as they grow and get older as well?
Yeah, so there's so many lows and highs in life and whatnot. The biggest example I want to set for them is no matter how high your highs are in life and lows are, your faith is always going to be there for you. I want them to know that when you pray to God, He always has a guiding hand over them. And my biggest prayer is always that they're healthy and whatnot, and for their safety and their everyday life. As a parent, you realize more so that there's so much out of your control for your kids and whatnot. They need to offer up your kids and family in prayer. Including them in morning and night prayer is just so important. I just hope when my kids get older, they know no matter when in life, it is always a great time to pray. Prayers of thanksgiving, prayers in times of need, in times of desperation, and so on. There's just so much that you can be healed and fixed with just a simple prayer.
So before we wrap up, I've got two kind of fun questions for you. I think that our listeners will appreciate this, hopefully at least. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the Second Vatican Council and some of the stipulations that they had. I'm just messing with you. No, that's a topic for another day. What I was really going to say was, what is your guys' go-to Mass in Westphalia and why? Bryce, I would love to hear your take.
Oh, boy. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, I'd have said 4:30. Big 4:30 guy, especially throughout high school, busy weeks, get home, just nice sleep in on Sundays. Now, if I'm being honest, my favorite is probably 8 a.m. on Sunday. I just like it, get to get up early, get home by a little after 9 o'clock. I eat breakfast with my family, and I have the rest of the day. So I would definitely probably say now 8, but just freshly changed.
Okay, so B. Thelen is a big 8 a.m. Mass guy. Dominic, how about you?
I'm not so sure Bryce is telling the truth. I think back 5 years ago, 4:30 Mass led into his date night. I think you went to 4:30 Mass and went on a date with Brennan after that.
That's the way I recall it, too.
Caught me. Red-handed.
I would say my favorite is 10 a.m. I bounced around, too. Back in high school, I loved 4:30 Mass. Before kids, we loved 8 a.m. Mass. And now it just works out for us to go to 10 a.m. Like Bryce said, it's just a part of the schedule now. You get home, have some lunch, and just start your Sunday off on the right foot.
Dominic with the right answer yet again. 10 a.m. is the way to go. 8 a.m. is simply too early. That's the middle of the night for me. 10 a.m.'s pushing it a little bit, but like you said, you get out at 11, you still got your whole day in front of you. 6 p.m. really isn't even an option for me. That's like a last resort kind of thing. I do like 4:30 on Saturdays as well, but I seldom go to it, so I couldn't agree more. 10 a.m. is the way to go.
One more thing I forgot to add about my 10 a.m. Mass that I really enjoy is I get to see Austin streaming Mass there. It's pretty nice to see.
You act like that's a good thing. I wouldn't go quite that far, but I appreciate the comment.
No wonder Mass numbers have went up so much. Not many people stream.
Actually, I heard the numbers plummeted, but... I got one more fun question for you. We had outdoor Masses in Westphalia this past summer and in the summer of 2020. Were you guys fans of those, and why or why not? Bryce?
Loved it. I did. it took a while to get used to focus being outside. There's so many external factors that can relate. But once you were able to really, focus in, I just kind of liked, I don't know if the low key is the right word, but it was just like relaxing. It felt homey. You're in your lawn chair. Your family's outside, nice weather. And it felt so much more homey. And to me, that was, really enjoyable. And just to enjoy the beautiful weather, the summertime too. I love being outside. I definitely think there's a lot of perks to it, and I did enjoy it, but it definitely took some time to get used to.
Yeah, it took me a few weeks to get used to it. I love the intimacy of just being in the church and being so close to God and whatnot. But after a few weeks of attending Mass outside, especially with kids, you can just lay your blanket out and they have room to play with toys that aren't clanking around in the pews. And it ultimately helped me focus more being out there because the kids could play without being a huge distraction as much as possible. And you just hear the birds chirping and the sun's out and the nice breeze of the summer morning and whatnot. I really turned into a big fan of the outdoor Mass.
I liked it quite a bit too. You had a wide variety of weather. Obviously, we had some really hot outdoor Masses where it was in the 80s and even upper 80s. I swear there were a few times I think I got a little bit sunburnt at Mass. I remember talking to someone the following day after a hot outdoor Sunday Mass, and they're like, "Oh, I see you got some sun this weekend. Did you go to the beach?" And it's like, "No, I went to Mass." And they're like, "Where are you going to Mass?" But on the flip side, we had some cold ones too, I remember Holy Thursday last year. I don't know if you guys were at that one, but it was outside. It was in March or April. And I remember it was in the 40s, but it was pretty windy as well. And the wind chill was colder than that. And of course, with Holy Thursday tradition, you get your feet washed. And sure enough, I go up there to get my feet washed, and I swear Father had to unthaw my foot first. I didn't feel my fingers or toes on the way back, but no, I'm with you. I really enjoyed those. It was good to be back in the church after all that as well, but it was a really cool experience that we got to go through for 2 years here in Westphalia. If you guys enjoy our podcast, feel free to give us a follow on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @FaithDiscussion. We tweet out the latest news and happenings around Westphalia and the parish community. We tweet out our latest episodes, our favorite Bible verses. Again, our Twitter handle is @FaithDiscussion. You can also shoot us an email at westphaliasfaithpodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to email us any questions or comments or concerns you have. If you have a certain topic that you'd like us to talk about, we'll certainly do that as well. Again, our email address is westphaliasfaithpodcast@gmail.com. Dominic, it's been an absolute blast doing this, and thanks again for being with us on the podcast this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you guys having me. I know I'm not quite to the Father Eric level. I know you thought you were having on this podcast, but in all honesty, I really appreciate you guys having me on. It was a big honor for me.
Absolutely. It's been our pleasure, and thank you to everybody who tuned in to listen this week, and we'll talk to you all again in a few short weeks.